started with a love story, but this one wouldn't end with a fairy tale kiss. Instead, it would spiral into one of Australia's most shocking drug cases, and an alleged plot to murder two completely innocent men. Our main character? Charlotte Lindstrom, a young Swedish woman with striking looks, a taste for the high life, and a boyfriend who just happened to be one of the most dangerous drug lords in the country. Her life in Sydney was everything she dreamed of. Luxury apartments, designer handbags, expensive nights out. But behind the gloss and glamour was a secret world of drug labs, aliases, and coded phone calls. And when the walls started closing in on her lover, Charlotte would make a decision so extreme, so irreversible, that it would change her life forever. It all began with a fire, or at least that's what the authorities thought. Fire crews were called to a property in Western Sydney after a man claimed there was a blaze. But when firefighters arrived, they couldn't find any flames. What they did find was something far more dangerous, a sprawling high-tech drug lab unlike anything they had seen before. This wasn't some back alley operation. It was industrial. Vast stainless steel tanks, complex distillation systems, powdered chemicals drying under electric blankets. And the drug they were producing, ecstasy, pure, high-quality MDMA, in quantities that could flood the Australian market for months. The street value of the drugs in that single lab? Around 127 million Australian dollars. It was, without a doubt, one of the largest busts in the nation's history. But who was behind it? That's where things got interesting. The lease for the property was signed under a fake name, John Water. No such person existed, and yet, this mysterious figure had purchased the exact equipment found in the lab from a local machinery company. Employees even remembered him, though he'd given them a different name, John Matthews. Police didn't have to dig far before those aliases started pointing in one direction, towards Stephen Spalaviera, a wealthy, charming man with a history of shady dealings, and Charlotte Lindstrom's boyfriend. Charlotte Lindstrom grew up in a middle-class suburb outside Stockholm, Sweden. By all accounts, she was a typical young woman, no big ambitions, no burning career goals. She simply wanted to be noticed, to feel special. And in her late teens, she set her sights on something bigger, the world beyond Sweden. At 19, she traveled to Australia with friends. For Charlotte, it was supposed to be an adventure, a chance to see something new, enjoy the sunshine, maybe find a job. What she didn't expect was to meet the man who would completely change the course of her life. That man was Stephen Spalaviera. 18 years older than her, Stephen was confident, well-dressed, and owned a gentleman's club in Sydney. Charlotte met him while working the door there, and he wasted no time sweeping her off her feet. The relationship moved fast. Within months, they were living together in a luxury waterfront apartment. Stephen funded her love of designer clothes, handbags, and expensive jewelry. To outsiders, they looked like a glamorous power couple. A young, beautiful blonde on the arm of a sophisticated, wealthy businessman. But Stephen's world had shadows. By 2005, police were already starting to hear his name in connection with drugs. That suspicion only grew after the bizarre fire incident at the Riverstone property, the one that led to the massive MDMA lab discovery. Still, Charlotte didn't seem to question where the money came from, or maybe she didn't want to know. She enjoyed the lifestyle, the trips, the attention, and Stephen, with his charm and confidence, had a way of making any question disappear with a smile. Over the next year, police quietly built their case. They traced the lab equipment purchases, interviewed witnesses from the machinery company, and connected the aliases back to Stephen. By now, they knew they were dealing with a major player in Australia's drug trade. And through it all, Charlotte stayed by his side. Not just as his girlfriend, but as someone who would later become deeply, dangerously involved. By mid-2006, the walls were closing in on Stephen Spalaviera. Police had witnesses ready to testify against him. Two men from a machinery company who had sold him the specialized equipment for the Riverstone drug lab. Their testimony was strong enough to link him directly to the operation and potentially send him to prison for decades. Stephen knew it, and so did Charlotte. Somewhere along the line, a chilling idea took hold. What if the witnesses were removed? If they were dead? There'd be no testimony, no link, and no case strong enough to convict. The details are murky about exactly who suggested it first, but one thing is clear: Charlotte became the messenger. Through coded phone calls and whispered conversations, she began working on a plan to have both men killed. Police were already listening. They tapped Stephen's phones, monitored his calls from jail, and tracked Charlotte's movements. The conversations were cryptic, full of code words. The solicitor was one of them, but investigators could piece together the meaning. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. The two men would be shot at closing time at their workplace. It would be staged to look like a robbery gone wrong. Charlotte even met with one of the supposed hitmen, a man she believed had been hired to carry out the job. She walked with him down a Sydney street, discussing what needed to be done. She didn't know that police were tailing her the entire time. The final confirmation came in a conversation that still shocks investigators. Charlotte casually mentioned meeting at the cemetery, a chilling detail that erased any doubt about her intentions. For police, that was the moment they knew. She was serious, and the murders were going to happen if they didn't act fast. They had to move quickly. The lives of two innocent men with no criminal history, not even a traffic ticket, were hanging in the balance. Within days, the plan would unravel. But for Charlotte, the line between love and crime had already been crossed. The day police decided to make their move, Charlotte thought she was just going about her life in Sydney. In reality, every step she took, every word she spoke was being recorded. For months, investigators had been quietly building a web of surveillance. Phone taps, tail cars, undercover officers in public places. They knew exactly who Charlotte was meeting, what was being discussed, and how close the murders were to becoming reality. Stephen was already in custody on drug charges, but that didn't stop him from influencing the plot. From behind bars, he sent Charlotte cryptic instructions. Police had the calls, but they needed more. They needed something that would seal both the murder conspiracy and the drug case. That came when they searched the couple's apartment in inner Sydney. Stephen wasn't home. He was away fishing. Charlotte, just 20 years old, greeted the detectives at the door. She seemed calm, almost confident. If she was nervous, she didn't show it. The search turned up an unexpected find: an empty Louis Vuitton shoebox. On its own, that didn't seem important, but detectives immediately recognized it from the drug lab scene. They'd found the matching shoes during the bust, and they were the exact same size Stephen wore. It was a small but vital link, something physical that could connect him to the lab. Forensics later confirmed DNA on the shoes, and even more damning, on a gas mask recovered from the site. Inside the mask, they found traces of MDMA crystals in the filters, proof that whoever wore it had stood over the manufacturing process. As for the murder plot, police decided to confront Charlotte before anyone could get hurt. She was arrested in the city after yet another meeting with one of the supposed hitmen. Back at the station, investigators laid it out. They had her voice on tape, the meetings, the details, the timeline. She didn't deny the conversations, but insisted she was acting for Stephen. In her mind, it was about protecting the man she loved. What she didn't realize yet was that Stephen was already preparing to distance himself from her entirely. When the case finally reached court, the media swarmed. The image of Charlotte Lindstrom, the glamorous Swedish socialite now accused of plotting to kill two men, was irresistible to headlines. Prosecutors laid out the murder conspiracy in chilling detail. They played the phone intercepts, described the meetings, and explained how Charlotte had agreed to have the witnesses killed to protect Stephen Spalaviero. For the drug charges, they presented the DNA from the Louis Vuitton shoes and the gas mask, tying Stephen directly to the $127 million MDMA lab. Stephen's defense took a different tack. His lawyers claimed the murder plot was entirely Charlotte's idea. According to them, Stephen only wanted her to dig up dirt on the witnesses to discredit them, not to have them killed. They painted Charlotte as young, naive, and impulsive, someone acting on her own out of misguided love. The jury didn't buy the whole story, but their verdict was split. After 2 days of deliberations, they found Stephen not guilty of organizing the murders. The two alleged hitmen also walked free on those charges. For Charlotte, there was no such escape. She pled guilty to conspiring to murder and agreed to testify against Stephen in the drug case in exchange for a lighter sentence. On the stand, she revealed intimate details of his operations, addresses of drug labs, how the equipment was set up, what the inside of the facilities looked like. Her testimony was gold for the prosecution. Combined with the forensic evidence, it was enough to convict Stephen on the drug charges. He was sentenced to more than 16 years in prison for manufacturing a large commercial quantity of a prohibited drug. Charlotte's cooperation earned her a reduced sentence, but she was still facing years behind bars. The court heard about her difficult prison experience, being kept in protective custody inside a men's facility, cut off from the life she'd once flaunted on Sydney's waterfront. When she looked across the courtroom at Stephen during her testimony, there were flashes of emotion, anger, sadness, maybe even longing, but the bond that had once defined her life was now broken. By the time the trials were over, Charlotte Lindstrom's glamorous life in Sydney was gone. The waterfront apartment, the designer handbags, the nights out, all replaced by the cold reality of prison walls and the weight of her own decisions. In custody, she was placed in special protection, housed inside a men's prison for her own safety. It was a world far removed from the one she had known, harsh, isolating, and unforgiving. She complained often about the conditions, but officers reminded her of why she was there. She had tried to arrange the murders of 2 innocent men. Stephen Spalaviero, meanwhile, was serving his 16-year sentence for the massive MDMA operation. Forensics had sealed his fate. His DNA inside the gas mask, ecstasy residue in the filters, and the shoebox that matched the lab scene. Even from prison, he managed to send Charlotte a few notes, smuggled through unofficial channels. But the romance that had once defined them had fractured beyond repair. Charlotte told investigators she no longer had feelings for Stephen. In many ways, she seemed older now, more aware of how easily she had been drawn into his world. She admitted she'd been blinded by his attention, his wealth, and the lifestyle he offered, and she'd been willing to cross lines she never imagined crossing, just to keep it. After serving her sentence, Charlotte walked out of prison with her parents waiting. They had called her every single day during her time inside, their voices a lifeline. Within hours, she was at Sydney Airport, boarding a flight back to Sweden. When she landed, she still looked every bit the poised socialite, but the story behind the image was darker than anyone could guess. Back home, she tried to rebuild, carrying with her the weight of what she'd done and the knowledge of how far love and loyalty can pull someone from the life they once knew. In the end, Charlotte's tale isn't just about drugs or a failed murder plot. It's about how fast glamour can turn to ruin, and how a single choice, made in the name of love, can change the course of a life forever.